Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming to our first event of the fall series with SunCloud's Child and Adolescent Professional Development Series. I'm Donna Bartlett, and I am a member of our outreach team here at SunCloud Health. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we provide integrated person-centered treatment with residential, which we're excited about opening our adolescent residential by November in Matson, Illinois, PHP and IOP programs in the Chicagoland area for adolescents and adults with special emphasis on helping those who are struggling with complex co-occurring issues. If you're interested in learning more about or collaborating with our team, there will be a couple of contacts. Lori, Kehoe, and myself will be listed at the end of the event today, and we're always happy to help. You'll also receive an email with follow-up instructions on how to receive your CE certificate. Our goal is to support you all as community partners with monthly educational events to support your practice. Today, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Audrey Grunst, who is a licensed clinical social worker, author, and CEO recognized for her expertise in resilience, mental health, and self-awareness. As founder of Simply Be and CEO of Be Collaborative Care, she leads multidisciplinary teams dedicated to transforming how individuals and families experience care. Audrey created the Growth and Resiliency Model, GARM, and wrote 5 steps to grow a resilient mind, blending evidence-based practices with practical tools for thriving in high-pressure environments. Her work highlights the essential role of self-awareness in building resilience, unlocking potential, and redefining what success looks like in business, athletics, and everyday life. Please welcome Audrey. Take it away.
Donna, thank you for that introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Yeah, I just want to get some housekeeping here together, and then that way we'll be able to kind of ride this through. Thank you, Donna, again for that introduction. What I really want to do today is talk to you about what is ADHD versus developmental trauma and actually the overlap effect of that. This is something that I learned or discovered about 10 years ago, and more research and more conversations are coming out about this overlap of an ADHD presentation, yet we know it's based in trauma. We want to understand why this is getting missed in the school setting and also identify the differentiators so that you can have a more appropriate intervention. This will help develop more trauma-informed strategies in the classroom and also support addressing those really unique needs of very complex people, students who are struggling, yet they may not have the foundation of the mental health care that they had during some traumatic events. This photo I find to be one of the best representations of how I see the trauma work that we do. Oftentimes, we are the ones who are holding the umbrella for students. We're the ones trying to help them come in, get dry, not be in that suffering place, and yet they're still, quote, choosing to stay stuck or choosing the hard road. And when we realize that while people are suffering and struggling, our job is to keep that umbrella, have them come under the umbrella with us, and not to force the umbrella on them, but actually give them agency and give them tools and coach them to join us. But we are not dropping our umbrella and joining in that suffering. We're also not forcing our tools on them, that it's a collaborative experience, it's a safe experience, and that the end goal is that the student is under the umbrella with us and that we're walking together side by side. And that's the goal of trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care includes education, knowing what you're working with and knowing when it's pure ADHD, knowing when it's PTSD, and also developmental trauma. ADHD, PTSD, and DTD present differently. The trauma type that occurs in PTSD versus DTD is different. And there is no trauma criteria in ADHD, obviously. When we look at trauma background, we want to understand, is there ADHD presentation and is it complicated by traumatic events? Are the traumatic events acute, such as a car accident, or is it a chronic, more interpersonal trauma, which is the DTD criteria? The core symptoms of ADHD is dysregulation and emotion and behavior and that sense of self. PTSD core symptoms is fear, flashbacks, avoidance, or dissociation. In DTD, it's very similar. It has similar colors as the other two. There's dysregulation and emotion, in behavior, and a poor concept of self. The onset of each of these are different. ADHD could be childhood or later. PTSD could be at any time. And we notice DTD in the childhood adolescent phase because we notice the attachment styles, the behaviors. So DTD really shows up in that elementary age or in the high school age. And if you think about this continuum, DTD would almost be the prerequisite to complex PTSD that we see in adults. Giving that language to minors, such as DTD, is more encompassing than potentially calling them a budding borderline, which we might hear someone say at that 16, 17-year-old age. And so we can talk about DTD and it moving into complex PTSD better explained. It could be better explained, not conduct disorder or not oppositional defiance disorder, but actually DTD. So it's very interesting. The attachment style of ADHD is not a concern in that criteria. Attachment style in PTSD is not a concern, but in DTD, the attachment style is a central focus of the criteria of having DTD. So when we think about these overlaps, PTSD is that traumatic exposure, it's intrusive symptoms, avoidance, numbing, and that hyperarousal system. ADHD, inattentive, hyperactive, impulsive, and DTD is an affective dysregulation, a negative self-concept, and an interpersonal disturbance. When we think about ADHD, we understand that there is a combined type that combines inattentive and hyperactivity, and that people can be on that spectrum. They could be more on the left, more on the right, or center to the combination of them. ADHD is a diagnosis that we see often. We see it often in outpatient, PHP, IOP, and psychiatry. We see it a lot in schools. We see ADHD in schools more than we see pure anxiety or pure depression. This is something that's probably the top intervention behavior plans that we are seeing at schools and consulting with schools on. And of course, we have flavors of anxiety and depression and others, but ADHD really tends to be something that's getting a lot of attention from the social worker, a lot of attention from the teachers, and probably classroom management. So diving a little bit deeper into the criteria of DTD, of that affective or that somatic dysregulation, is a difficulty identifying and expressing emotions, having somatic symptoms such as headaches or stomach aches, and dissociation. The cognitive behavioral dysregulation could be hypervigilance, self-injury, impaired attention, difficulty with planning and problem solving, and really having difficulty with goal-oriented behavior. That's a big one that comes up in some DTD screenings and conversations, is the inability to have goal-driven behavior due to the disorganization of the cognitive impairment or even the emotional impairment. And then the next one is the relational self-dysregulation, the negative self-concept, the poor attachment styles, difficulty trusting others, and then you can see aggression, you can see boundary issues. So we've seen this in ODD, or what we used to call reactive attachment disorder. When I got really passionate and interested in DTD was when I was a social worker, therapist, case manager at Lawrence Hall Youth Services. And in Lawrence Hall Youth Services, I was in charge of Avers Home, which is 8 boys who lived in a home for possibly 9 months or more, not placed in foster care, and most had some delinquent background, delinquency court. So when I was working with them and using primarily DBT, there was a lot of dysregulation and attachment, a lot of pushing and pulling from me as their therapist, and acting out those dynamics and relationships that is take care of me, I don't want you to take care of me. And that dysregulation due to poor self-concept has been because there's been relational trauma through the years, which might be abandonment, abuse, food insecurities. So DTD is not a one-time PTSD experience. DTD is a chronic, ongoing experience that then forms the way that they shape the world around them. So when we are thinking about these long-term experiences in a student's life, there is a biological impairment that we know. We know that the language processing is impaired, conveying abstract increase is difficult, and it's very hard to process abstract experience or opinions or abstract concepts. There's an impairment of literacy skills and acquisition, meaning they can't retain the math, the social studies, the science. There's an impairment there. There's a hyperarousal impairing attention in the classroom. So they're on that fight or flight mode. Therefore, they're not able to pay attention to the board. The agitated state makes communication development difficult because when you're unable to relax and listen, you're unable to retain language, you're unable to process information. So therefore, when you need to recall language, when you need to recall something because you're struggling and you need to advocate and talk, you have not learned the language. You haven't learned what it means to express yourself because it's been difficult to listen. It's been difficult to take in language. So we think about the biology, the brain's impact on that from that trauma, and then how that impacts learning. The biological impact of the mirror neurons. When we are mirroring people in our environment who are neglecting or avoiding or not caretaking, we learn how to not make eye contact. We learn how to not engage in the room. We learn a flat affect. So when we are exposed to long-term trauma, we then show that back in the classroom setting. So as a student, the head's down, they're flat, they're not making eye contact, they're disengaged because their attachment has been disorganized through that experience that they've had with their caregivers or the inconsistency of caregivers. The learning of empathy is decreased, and the learning of how to take in safety signals and also how to give safety signals. So what does that mean? So it's difficult to take in someone's smile. It's very difficult to take in someone's leaning into you and being interested. It can be very overwhelming or feeling vulnerable when someone is leaning in and making eye contact with you. You don't know how to receive that safety signal. And on the flip side, the student doesn't know how to give safety signals. So if you're looking for a student to make you feel more comfortable with them, or you're looking for a student to look like they're listening and interested, you're expecting them to give you a safety signal, but they aren't able to give you a safety signal because they haven't learned it themselves. The brain hasn't learned it, the body hasn't learned it, therefore you're not going to see it in the classroom. And that is a feedback loop. That student is going to get less engagement from a teacher or from peers because they are not signaling out and they're not getting the signal back in. And then the neuroplasticity, which is using many parts of your brain to process information through the left and the right hemisphere, and also the neuroplasticity of understanding how the amygdala might be firing and wiring, but then the frontal cortex calming that down. That neuroplasticity isn't happening if it's not being exercised. So we have to mention ACEs if we're talking about trauma, because we know the higher the ACEs score, the more likely is that they are going to present with trauma behavior, trauma emotions, adaptivity. And what ACEs really says is that in context, it really makes sense why this person is acting the way that they're acting. So the ACEs is not perfect, but it was one of the first conversations by the CDC to say, hey, maybe this kid's behavior isn't because they're bad. Maybe this kid's behavior is because they have a high ACEs score. They hit many domains in this area. And the more the score, the higher the risk factors go up, including early death, high risk behavior. So as we're increasing our ACEs, we're assuming that it's not a one-time PTSD event. We're actually assuming that it's multiple events over a long period of time that hit about 8 domains that we see here on the left. So I want to bring this to a case study of a student named Eric. And so we're going to just take some assumptions here in this case study and start to apply some of the concepts that we're learning. Let's say that Eric was recently diagnosed with ADHD combined type, and he was started on a stimulant medication Eric or Jordan, was referred to student services due to chronic inattention, impulsivity, and disruptive behavior in class. Teachers report he rarely finishes assignments, blurts out answers, and gets out of his seat frequently. He's been suspended twice for aggression towards peers. Okay. We know the student, right? So part of what I want to do today is get into context what we're learning and envisioning a student who may be having this. Staff's observation is that there's frequent fidgets, rocks in the chair, and wanders around the room, interrupts classes discussions, talks excessively, and struggles to wait his turn, often stares off during lessons and appears zoned out. With medication, his focus is slightly improved, but his emotional outbursts, defiance, and peer conflict has intensified. And so he's referred to student services. And let's say that we have a couple people in our room today that are in student services, social work, counseling, or in private practice seeing this type of case. So now that you're having this training, you are trying to maybe uncover some more background so that while the diagnosis of ADHD is on paper, you also have context and background to make you suspicious that there's something more going on. You know, because you've worked with this case, this family, this school, is that there's been multiple foster placements between the age of 3 and 7. And there's some suspect of neglect, maybe some DV exposure. The school's reported food insecurity. The school noted that there's not a consistent caregiver relationship, that it's a different family member, it's a different friend, maybe they're walking home alone. It's not a consistent person that you've seen take responsibility for the student. They've not received trauma-focused therapy. It's not in the records. And the trauma history was not assessed during the ADHD evaluation. We were really ruling in ADHD or ruling out ADHD. And we also want to take further considerations like the Child Hope Scale, the Child Alexithymia measure, and the emotional regulation checklist. So when we do the further considerations, we can start to uncover and using self-reports, which these 3 are self-reports that you can use either formally or informally to inform your work. And these 3 assessments can be given to teachers and caregivers, so you can get a multidisciplinary view on what might be going on with the student. So now we have some new considerations for him. The behaviors that we're seeing, the sudden mood shifts and the meltdowns and the small stressors that are really triggering him, could be explained by DTD, which is that chronic hyperarousal and difficulty regulating emotions. That zone out might be trauma triggers that overwhelm his nervous system. And that difficulty trusting peers and frequent conflict might be attachment. So what we used to think is ADHD presentation, we might want to consider the background and the history and it be DTD, because we know that it has been pervasive and long-term and hits multiple criteria factors. But why do we see school systems focusing a lot on ADHD? Well, it makes sense because schools have time-limited evaluation periods. Trauma screening is rare. Schools are not clinical settings. The academic framing of the problems. So struggles are often framed as learning or attention problems, not always emotional or relational wounds. We're getting reports from educators. Educators are going to talk about education and those barriers. They're not educated or trained, nor should they be, to say, I think this is a relational wound that I'm seeing in the classroom. That's not their role. So the more we educate and the more that we understand, the more questions we can ask. ADHD is viewed as a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's like brain-based wiring, while DTD stems from chronic relational trauma. And that's not embedded in the school system. DTD is not even in the DSM-5. But the consideration of it being added or considered, just like complex PTSD, gives us more information and makes us better at our interventions. Without looking at the attachment patterns, safety, or emotional regulation, the deeper rooted cause is overlooked. And we go for the one that we know best, ADHD. So what can we do different? There's a lot of things that we can do different. We're going to go through a couple of those things. And this is the how-to of the presentation, how to address DTD. We talked a little bit about what is it, why is it there, but I love, my favorite thing of presenting is how to address, how to treat, how to tangibly address this. So the first thing to do is continue to work on trauma-informed schools, training for non-clinical staff to recognize trauma signs. Okay, you can see here that I didn't say make non-clinical staff become therapists. That's not the expectation, but we can talk about the signs of trauma. We could talk about how confusing it is. What is ADHD and what is trauma, and normalize that. Include trauma screenings in behavioral evaluations, using trauma-informed attachment-focused interventions, collaborating with families and mental health providers to understand the history and context of the student, and advocate for a multi-tiered system of support. We also want to provide options and coping skills. So in the classroom, providing coping skills that are trauma-informed, using CBT, but a trauma-focused CBT lens in the school setting. If you're working on SEL curriculum, if you're working on wellness curriculum, using some TF to color that training. Use attachment-focused work with current safe adults to build safety and trust. So, for example, let's say that Eric has a good relationship with a librarian. We can set up Eric with a one-on-one with that librarian once a week, and they can read a book together. Reading a book together is co-regulation. It's good mirror neurons for good proactive social behavior. You're building a relationship between the student and a safe adult. And the attachment is just a healthy relationship between an adult and a child in an appropriate setting. Also in the building, having a sensory regulation break area that can ground or provide co-regulation in the room. And I've seen this improve a lot through the years. Consistent, predictable routines with trauma-informed behavioral supports is important. Trauma-based dysregulation must be treated alongside any academic or behavior plans. Trauma treatment is not separate from anything. Trauma-informed it's always that color in the behavior plan, that color in the IEP intervention. We're always trying to color that in. The reason why that's important is because trauma creates a physical experience. A physical experience is interpreted as danger, and when a kid feels like they're in danger, they're not going to have good classroom behavior. So trauma triggers cortisol, adrenaline, fight or flight, insomnia, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance abuse, school refusal, and overall poor psychological or emotional development. Take that and then compare it to the demands of a classroom. They're not paying attention. They're getting up. They're moving their bodies. They're moving their bodies because their bodies are telling them their adrenaline is racing. They have to get up. And when they get up, what do? Sit down. So then the demand on them feels impossible. So what do? Fight and argue, or they shut down and put their head down. When we understand what trauma is physically first, and we understand the demands of a classroom, there's a lot more compassion, there's a lot more empathy, and a lot more willingness to help them with the root cause, so that when we redirect, we understand that when we direct DTD, it's going to look different than when we redirect ADHD. For example, in ADHD, we might reward the redirection, and they'll feel motivated. In DTD, we might reward the redirection, and they might reject that reward because it's a power dynamic. So then they say, I don't want your stickers. I'm doing this on my own agency. Screw your stickers. Okay, that's the DTD presentation, because the intervention is working for ADHD, but it's not going to work for that DTD. So when we are doing interventions and creating some behavior intervention or check-in, check-out, or any PBIS material, we have to make sure that we are always empowering that person to have agency. giving them as much control as we can, making them feel valued and important in the classroom, and also that they belong in the classroom. If we address these 4 factors, we are likely to have the relationship and we are likely to have the behaviors that are pro-social behaviors, because people feel good, they do good. And when people feel bad, they do bad. And so really trying to create agency with these 4 things. And if we practice these 4 things, we get the outcomes we're looking for. We also need to use best practice principles. And this is what we use here at Simply Be. So to be trauma informed, we must take responsibility and immediately address trauma-related behaviors. We don't delay and wait. We are responsible for that student's well-being, and we need to address it right away. We need to be consistent and be that safe person every day. We can't have different personalities based on our moods. We need to be consistent for our kids, especially DTD, because they are expecting the same thing. And when we don't deliver the same thing, they think that there's something wrong. They're concerned because then they don't know how to act in the environment. So consistency might even look like, hey, buddy, I know yesterday we played this game and it was a really good time. Today, I'm not feeling well, so we're not going to play that game today. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need to be consistent in your attachment and your relationship with the student. Using ethics to maintain that appropriate educator relationship. So aim to increase teaching and instruction time and aim to reduce time spent on discipline. If you're a teacher, teach. If you're a social worker, social work. So stay in your lane and aim to increase your intervention or your task and try to decrease the negative feedback, because the more we spend doing problem solving and solution focus and having a good experience, the better the return. Also having to have good collaboration, meaning that there's a common goal between us and the student, and that they are a member of that classroom. They are a member of the school community, and they feel like they have a voice and they have a say. They may not get what they want, but they do feel heard, and that's important. We need to stay informed as providers or teachers. And I think Bessel van der Kolk said it really well. He said, we have the capacity to heal others, and that's equal to the capacity to destroy them. So if we're not informed on best practice, if we're not informed in what is best for these kids, we're doing harm. And so our responsibility is to stay informed. And lastly, to empower that they can change their social conditions in the room or socially, and to help them feel safe and be able to thrive. So these 6 principles, I think, are that checkbox. Am I doing these 6 things with my students? Yes, I'm on the right track. No, okay, why not? If you're a supervisor, if you're an instructional teacher, if you're at the district level, you could just talk about these 6 things. You could define them yourself for your own school. How do we feel that we are being consistent? How are we matching our ethics? You can be having these conversations with your department and really driving this home. And you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be a therapist. These are the things that we all could be doing as teachers, as parents. These are things that are very approachable. Now, the more tangible skills that have been helpful are things such as cause and effect. Teaching kids, if you do this, then this happens. So an example of, if I put a pin to a balloon, what do we expect to happen? So creating a relationship between behaviors and consequences, and doing that through SEL worksheets and conversations, but talking over and over about cause and effect. When we learn this in a natural environment, we might learn that if I shut down, then the effect is that I don't get in trouble. Okay, so that's a really important conversation to be having with the kid. And you can say, how about the cause and effect of, if you make eye contact and if you engage, what is the effect of that? Oh, people think you're friendly. Oh, you're socially signaling to your teacher that you're listening. So they learn cause and effect. It may not be healthy, but we can teach them cause and effect in a healthy way. Teaching flexible thinking, that 2 truths can exist at the same time. being able to disagree, have difference of opinions. One guy sees 6, the other guy sees 9. That's because that's true for the both of them. And how do we hold those things true at the same time? This is almost feels impossible when we are in a dangerous environment. Why? Flexibility leaves the door open for danger because you can't predict black and white what's going to happen. So with ADHD, you teach executive functioning, you teach flexible thinking, and they pick up on it pretty quick. DTD, you don't teach it and they don't pick up on it. They have to experience it over and over and over again for a lifetime to integrate it. So flexible thinking for ADHD, executive skills, great, done. Flexible thinking for DTD is a lived experience that needs to be done over and over and over again. And it's a different approach to that student. Working on sequential thinking. So when we are triggered or traumatized, we get disorganized. For example, time. Has anyone had a really scary experience and time slows down or it speeds up, or you have no memory of what happened, or you get your facts mixed up? That's because when we are in an emotional triggered state, our brain is not thinking sequentially. Our brain is really just sourcing information and deciding what the biggest threat is, what the biggest problem is. So sequential thinking, this idea of building and stacking information, that is something that we teach in ADHD because it's executive functioning. And if you teach someone with ADHD, step 1, unpack your bag. Step 2, put your binder in your desk. Step 3, hang your coat. They will eventually learn that. With someone with DTD, they will hear it, but they might have more anxiety about getting it right or wrong, and that causing them to be in a dangerous position. Because trauma confuses real danger versus perceived danger. So if they don't want to get it wrong, then they're going to fight or flight in that situation. Someone with ADHD, they might be afraid to get it wrong, but they may not have such emotional reactions to it. You'll feel the difference between these two. And another one is pros and cons, teaching them, if I do this, this is what can expect. So you'll see that this is all ADHD friendly. And for the DTD, it's more relational in the way that you approach it, and it's less concrete, it's less worksheety. To set your student up for success when you are doing these interventions, if they are doing steps, like picture steps in the classroom, or if you are working on things with them from executive functioning, take care of their bodies first. So recognize when that nervous system is in a fight or flight, freeze or fawn, like just notice what's happening and work on shifting them to more psychological safety. You'll notice, are they breathing calmer? Are they relaxed, or do they feel really tense? Seeing it as a nervous system response helps us as adults say, okay, we need to downshift this a little bit physically before we go into our worksheets today. Somatic tracking, somatic is physical. So you're tracking the student and noticing where the stress is held in their body. So if you're noticing like tension in their jaw, finding an opportunity to teach them some breathing exercises to reduce that tension in the jaw. Or if their shoulders are squeezed up, giving them an opportunity to just roll their shoulders back. Tracking the physical symptoms of anxiety will then make them better learners. Bilateral stimulation is one of my favorite things to do. I do it all the time. When I'm in a tricky situation, if I'm sitting down, I'll just squeeze my left toes, my right toes, my left toe, my right toe, and I'll just squeeze my toes back and forth. No one knows in the room what I'm doing, but it's keeping my brain online. We're going to talk about the brain in a moment, but it's going to keep my brain online. Simply B, we have walk and talk consents. So when you walk next to someone and walk through the park, having that bilateral stimulation does keep the brain wired at the higher level, like frontal cortex in your left and right hemisphere, and kind of relaxes that amygdala that's kind of sending those messages to the body. An example of just breathing, 4-7-8 method of just teaching them how to kind of breathe in, but breathe out longer. Having a longer exhale is a nice way to reset the nervous system. So regulating before reasoning is what we call it. Teaching them how to regulate before you talk to them. So first, breathing exercises, grounding activities, and then talk to them. And you can say, I can see that this feeling is really overwhelming. Would you like to take a walk or sit down quietly? Okay, so we name it and we tame it. We're not giving them feedback that is 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long. They're not listening. We're first regulating, then we're reasoning. In that same kind of interaction, we also want to make sure that that environment feels as predictable and as good of routine as possible. So visual schedules, consistent transitions, sensory check-ins to reduce anxiety is really, really helpful. So just having them every hour kind of going to something sensory and just regulating themselves, putting it away, trying to self-regulate, go back to the sensory. So with sensory tools, I like them to go to practice, but then I like them to take a break to see how it feels to be by themselves, teaching them a little bit of that self-reliance, but giving them a tool at the same time. Also building trust through attachment-based interaction. So again, consistent, not threatening interactions, being warm, soft eye contact. Sometimes they don't want you to look at them. Sometimes sitting next to them is better than sitting in front of them. Boundaries and reciprocity is so important when it comes to that relational attachment style. We want to avoid power struggles at all costs. And that's really easy to get into with PBIS because sometimes there's rewards that feel contingent and it feels conditional. And when we're talking about trauma, when we talk about a conditional relationship with rewards, the interpretation could be, I'm not good enough because I didn't get the reward. So when you're doing PBIS, be mindful of what it feels like to set those boundaries, give those rewards, and how that might come off as a power struggle. So what I like to do is think about rewards, think about consequences, play it out in a lot of different ways. And then any barriers that I think might happen in that system, I like to address them from the beginning and just see if I can nip it in the bud a little bit in the beginning. But when you set a boundary, you can say, I care about you and I need to keep this space safe for both of us. Let's find another way to express that. Or at the end, after the post-crisis, you could say, I noticed you got really upset earlier. What would help you next time? So you're planning, predicting for the next round. In a crisis, you want to make sure that you recognize the signs as early as possible, like as they're increasing agitation. And then the difference between that trauma trigger and defiance is that a student shutting down may be experiencing dissociation, not disrespect. So have one foot in the door, like this is disrespect, but have another foot on the other side of the door and say, maybe this is dissociation. Just having two different options makes you less judgmental and makes you have more opportunities. And ultimately, the 1 degree effect, it's the concept of every day, if you can redirect that plane just 1% in that student's life, eventually they do land in a different destination. They might have taken off at a really bad spot at the beginning of the year, and your goal is to get a 1 degree effect. And if you look back on that week and think, yeah, I got a 1 degree this week, you're on track. We don't want a dramatic turn, and we want consistency in that student. But what can students and parents do, right? We talked a lot about what a school could do, what a teacher could do, what an adult professional can do, but what can students and parents do? So it simply be, we teach the growth and resiliency model to students, to parents. And what we teach them is the foundation of self-awareness and building on top of that. Self-awareness is based in 4 things. I call it the big 4. It's your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and urges. And this is borrowed from evidence-based treatment. And it talks about how the awareness of these 4 oftentimes aren't there for students. So if you're looking at me in the camera here, and I have my big 4 here, I talk about self-awareness being either here or back here. And if you're lacking self-awareness back here, you don't know how you think and you feel, therefore you are not going to be effective in your environment. And I tell kids that all the time. If you don't know what you're thinking about your teacher and you act out, then if you knew your thought, maybe you would have slowed down and not act out. So let's become aware of your big 4. Okay, so what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's your physical sensations? And the next thing I say is, they're not going to be pretty. They're going to be reactive. They're going to be messy. That's okay. The goal is to see them. The goal isn't to change them right away. The goal is to just know that they exist and just giving you that much more mindfulness to maybe make a different decision. So my biggest goal when working with students and parents is to go from a life like this, busy and stressed, to this. Know your thoughts and your emotions. Okay. You're going to be a lot better of a parent, a lot better of a student if you know what's going on with yourself. The reason why this is so important is because we have to be able to observe our state of mind. So step 2 is being aware, but then also observing. So when I'm feeling angry and I have thoughts of screw this, and I have urges to put my head down or slam my pencil on the desk, and I have a physical sensation of like a headache, that's back here, right? But if I bring it to my front and I just name it, then I can observe it and think, wow, my amygdala is really acting up. Okay, my alligator brain is on full drive right now, and I'm going to observe that. An alligator brain is that fight or flight. So an alligator does 2 things if it's kind of submerged in water. It's either going to be in the water scanning for threat, and it's going to attack the threat, or it's not going to beat the threat and it decides to retreat and say, I can't beat the threat. So students with DTD are deciding, can I attack this situation or do I need to run away from it? Back here. Now, through the GARM model, we look at it and we think, okay, my alligator is really, really loud, but I'm going to develop my frontal cortex, which is my frontal part of my brain. And my prefrontal cortex is going to talk the alligator down. So by observing, the owl is probably the most observant animal I could think of. The owl is observing the alligator. So now all of a sudden I have a relationship with myself and I'm doing all of this work before I say or do anything. That's mindfulness. Slowing it down, having the observation of the frontal cortex talking to the amygdala. And after I talked to the amygdala and looked at it, I realized that, okay, while I was not aware and I'm aware, and I'm looking at it and I'm reactive towards my experiences right now, I have a choice. I can go and use my skills. I can adapt. I can stay responsive. Or if I'm just aware enough to know that I'm choosing to be reactive, that's actually progress. So when I worked with Lawrence Hall Youth Services and the Avers kids, I told them that my first goal with them was for them to see their anger and see when it happened. That's it. I'm like, don't change it. Don't make a plan. Just see it. Okay. Because once you see yourself observing yourself, it's a lot harder to be that person. It just is, because you hold yourself to a higher standard. So I say, yep, you're reactive as, heck. Yeah, you are. Okay. Now you're learning skills and this part of the brain feels a lot better. And then once we realize that this part of the brain is calmer and happier, we tend to engage that more. It just depends on which one we've exercised. Now, if there's a therapist in here, you might start to see how this is like internal family systems, right? The owl can talk to the alligator. You could do self-talk and CBT. In sports performance, you could talk about self-talk and sports performance, but you're creating an internal relationship with yourself before you've even done anything. The difference of a reactor is that you are feeling guilty, ashamed. You're acting for perfectionism. You're feeling urgent and out of control. If you're in that responder mentality, you feel connected to yourself and others. You feel in control. You feel competent in what you're trying to do. You're thoughtful, organized, and prepared. And it does not take long to figure out when you're a responder and when you're a reactor. This is probably the most intuitive thing that students and clients say at the end of the day. Like, I just know when I'm a reactor. I know I'm a responder. In parent group, every week we talk about, okay, how do I be a responder with my kid? And we say, okay, well, do your big 4 when you're triggered. Maybe before you go into your kid's room, do your big 4, observe it, be a responder to it, then walk in and try to be a better version of yourself. Because what starts to happen is you start to integrate a plan. You start to think, okay, well, I'm having this really negative thought. But if I activate my frontal cortex as a student, we might think, will this class ever end? And they think that over and over again. But then they think, okay, well, I guess I'm here. What's my next best step? Or I don't know what this assignment is, but I might be able to ask for help. So teaching kids self-awareness gives them the information to eventually be a responder. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can't expect a kid to have an action plan. You can't expect a kid to be a responder if they don't even know what they're thinking, if they don't even know what they're feeling. How in the world are they going to be effective? So we got to start with self-awareness. And then after that, we can build on it. Now, at the end of all of this, my opinion is where that growth mindset comes from. And what I love about this is this is self-determinant. This is pure agency for people who are experiencing trauma. And it's just them asking themselves, did I regulate myself? Was I a good role model to myself? Was I a good role model to others? There's no punishment. There's no black and white. There's no score. It's just a moment to think, how did I do? And then how am I building a relationship with myself, which in trauma, the only relationship we have with self sometimes is so uncomfortable that it just dissociates. So developing a relationship with self is a lot of work. But if we ask, hey, are you proud of you? Like, do you have a relationship between your owl and alligator? And like, is your alligator maybe like kind of chilling a little bit more and your owl is acting more? Like, how do you feel about that relationship with yourself? So break it down into alligator and owl, break it down into reactor responder. Like, it doesn't need to be difficult for us to talk about these really complex things with students that are very meaningful, because ADHD is so behavioral and DTD is so relational that we have to ask these questions and we have to ask them appropriately in a school setting, but we can do it. And then the last one is, remember that goal-oriented behavior that's very hard because they're disorganized? Asking, am I reaching my goals for myself? Or asking a parent, am I reaching my goals for my child? Like teaching them goal-oriented activities, goal-oriented like thought processes can be really important and very helpful in that repairing process. So I will wrap up here and take questions in a moment. Additional resources are available for anyone who wants to know more either about GARM or about the way that we are providing resources free to the community. They're on our website on the resources page. So I'm here to share that. And then I will stop sharing my screen here and then let Donna jump in here if she has any questions or wants to share anything.
Okay, I will just share this with our information as well, mine and Lori. But Audrey, of course, as always, amazing information, so much needed information that we all enjoyed. I know that we had one of the questions we had, I don't know if you can see them as well,
Mm-hmm.
but it was asking if you would present in their school.
Yes. So Simply Be does speak in schools, kind of all over actually. So we would be happy to do that. All you need to do is shoot us an email or give us a call and connect you to Kate Kelly, who is our organizer.
Okay. And then I know, let me see. Another question. Can you please discuss the limitations of a DTD diagnosis, given that it is not included in the DSM-5,
Yeah.
especially within the context of diagnostics?
Yeah. So maybe it will be in the next one if we all put our brains together and fight for it. They did fight for it and it didn't get in. I don't know the politics behind it, but I use it as the comparison of how we talk about complex trauma. I think complex trauma in adulthood has really kind of reframed that axis too that we sometimes judge. So I use DTD as a concept to treat and inform my treatment plan. And then I will diagnose with anxiety, depression, eating disorder, ADHD. I'll use a DSM diagnosis, but then I will use the DTD framework to do trauma-focused counseling and trauma-informed work.
Okay. So Audrey, have you ever used ACT and ROD BT as well, alongside the therapies that you talked about today?
Yes. So ACT and RODBT are my choice specifically with eating disorders because it really addresses perfectionism and an over-controlled state. So when I'm using ACT, let's say values, right? So they identify 10 values, which we have an exercise on our website, and it has a training video of how to go from 100 to 10 values, and it's free. You can download it. So if they pick 10 values and we talk about one of those values is trust, when I talk about trust, I know that the trust they're talking about is informed because they feel unsafe or have felt unsafe in their life. And so I explore trust differently with DTD because I know it's probably very fragile and sensitive. But if someone picked trust who didn't have DTD but had maybe some friendship breaks in their friendship circles, I talk about trust very differently with someone who may not fit into the DTD category. So it just like trauma informed means that you're wearing those glasses and just informing your conversations. And I might be more indirect and gentle with DTD about trust until they open that door, and then I'll walk in it, but I'm not going to just jump into it if I have suspicion that there's trauma.
Okay, great. Another question, and just I know you can't see who, like in the beginning, I was kind of asking everyone where they were from. And so, yeah, we have people from schools, we have people from private practices, government agencies, psychologists, social workers, counselors, so all over the place. And so, a lot of different questions. Here's one that said, when you use the phrase reward the redirection, can you give us some more examples of what this could look like in the classroom?
So an ADHD rewarding the redirection would be they get some kind of point, or I know of a system called check-in, check-out, where they can get a higher score if they're on task. So when you reward the redirection, it's you redirect, they actually redirect, and then you reward them. So that's what I meant by that. With the power struggle that I mentioned, when you redirect and give them like a sticker or a point, if they see that as you're trying to own me, you're trying to control me, there's an exchange here, they might resist that. And I saw that at the group home, that when I gave rewards, they would resist it because it's who are you to have that power over me? F your sticker. So, the reward needs to be informed. And if they don't want the reward, they don't want the point, you need to talk to them about that and find something alternative, because a kid with ADHD will probably take it. But a kid with DTD might see that. And the next time you like miss the point, you miss their behavior, you weren't consistent, they're not going to forgive you. Right. So that's where that access to, color comes in, that you start to think, oh, this doesn't feel like ADHD. This feels very hot and cold and difficult and push and pull and complex. Like that's probably because there's a lot more going on and it's just been mislabeled.
Yeah. Okay, so Lisa asked, can you speak to when traits of ADHD contributes to the development of complex trauma, and how may treatment be impacted?
So the traits of ADHD are the fidgeting, distractibility, standing up, moving around, things like that. So the way that we want to think about it is that if we do a history and we find that we suspect that there's complex trauma, then we want to address the fidgetiness and the distractibility and maybe the dissociation through more relational coaching, connecting, empathy, slowing things down, making sure that they're psychologically regulated to like hear your intervention. ADHD, if you do a history and there's not much there, you can typically give them feedback and give them direction very quickly, and the faster the better for them. That then they'll kind of make a change quickly, and you won't get any like negative feedback or like resistance from it. And so in my opinion, the informed treatment is that DTD, you like regulate the body, you build the relationship and do interventions. ADHD, you kind of regulate and do the interventions, but you don't need the relationship as much.
One of the biggest questions is, are we sharing your slides? Questions that you're answering, can we share that information? And yes, like we're recording this, so you will get a copy of it. Like Audrey said earlier, like definitely reach out to Simply Be, right? To get some of the tricks or different resources that you shared at the end of your presentation. Anything else, Audrey, that you feel like would be helpful?
No, I think that this presentation was really powerful for me when I did it once at a local school district, and there was like 60 social workers who were just like, can you talk to my administration about this and principals? And like, this is a whole different approach to what we're seeing. And I think it just I think DTD validates what the struggle is in schools. And so if you're struggling, it's because that DTD, it's not really where it needs to be. And so if you can advocate for that, and if you can really just push trauma informed interventions in your school, it solves for that. And I think we just need to like continue conversations and keep having that dialogue and make that improvement.
Yes, I agree. And that, again, thank you so much for obviously all the information that you shared and all the things that you do anyway, Audrey, just in general. Like it's amazing.
Thank
And
you.
so we always appreciate you kind of coming on and sharing with us.
Yeah, of course.
So again, if there's any questions, like you guys will get the CE. Were you gonna do were you gonna do something at the end
Oh
of
yeah, if you're still here, hold
sorry.
on. I need feedback.
We're just
I really do love feedback. I think it makes my next presentation better. So if anyone here would please spend 3 minutes and complete this feedback form. I read it and I do make changes. Yes, I had typos. Yes, Eric's name and then Jordan's name was in there. So I already got those, but you can still call me out on it. But yeah, any feedback I genuinely take and appreciate.
Yeah, so we'll leave this slide up for a couple minutes if you guys want to do that. I just clicked it and it came right on. And so, and I agree. Like I know Audrey, she definitely like is open to feedback and continues to grow and learn like all of us, right? And just wants to do the best for her community and clients. And so, and all of us. So we appreciate it. Um, if you're on your phone, I don't know.
If you're on your phone, that is a little trickier. What you could do is chat us your email really quickly. Jenny here will be able to email it to you.
Can Jenny see any of these in the chat? No, right?
I think she can.
Okay. Jenny, they're coming in hot and heavy.
I know that's the one downfall of a QR code, isn't it?
Yeah. And if not,
You
we
can,
can
yeah, you can probably cut and paste on. I'm thinking maybe you can cut and paste, Donna.
Oh yeah, okay, let me see.
Yeah, they're coming in pretty quick, but if we can just copy the chat log of the emails and just send them to me, then I'll get that over to everybody. That'd be great.
Oh yeah, Jenny, can you put the link in
the chat?
Yeah, can you do a share link?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You want to
That
throw
is
it
the
in the chat,
easiest
Jenny?
way.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, I'm gonna do that right now.
Jennifer Nelson, you're on it. Kelly Lyons, yep.
And anyone, if you don't get it, and obviously you have our email, we will get it to you as well. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.